anxietycenter.com.
I've been working with Stacy, and one of my issues that I do 24/7 is I overanalyze and ask questions so habitually now about my condition and what's going on that it's gotten to the point where, I can't do much. Like if I do, I'm forcing myself to do things, but it seems like it's always in my head, making up a new question here or there. And I was just wondering if you ever went through that, and if you had any advice on or tips that might have helped you for that.
I certainly asked a lot of questions in the beginning stages of my recovery, but I know you and your history with anxiety center therapists.
Yeah.
And I think at this particular point, I think there's something else going on. Because as you know, you probably heard this ad nauseum from Stacy, that when our stress goes up, the brain goes into overdrive looking for answers. That's just what it does. And if we're okay with that, and if we passively accept that and just reduce our stress, eventually that increase in mind chatter diminishes. But if it's not diminishing, that means there's another reason going on, and that'll usually come back to a threat. It's like an unextinguished fear. So if I could ask, what do you think the threat underneath your questions are?
Sure. He told me feeling safe and secure, which is irrational all the time. Trying to feel safe and secure at all times by asking a question. So usually the questions really pick up when I get to a place I'm not comfortable. Mm-hmm. They start bombarding me in my head. And it doesn't even matter what the topic is. It's just the behavior side of it. Doesn't matter the topic. And I was just, it just seems abnormal to me. But if it's something that you've heard of before, I feel a little bit better.
Mm-hmm. So what are you trying to feel safe and secure from? What's the worst thing that can happen?
That's a great question. I don't think I've really, because, you guys helped me the first time around. I got through the worry, took a few years, and then the COVID came in, I was locked down, whatever, and all this came back. Yeah. I don't know what the worst, that's a great question. What is the worst thing that could happen? Not knowing? For some reason, that's a threat to me, not knowing.
Not knowing what?
Not knowing, maybe we're getting somewhere here. Not knowing, or maybe I'm not accepting that the psychological side of anxiety is real, that these are real symptoms and that they're common, maybe.
And so what if this is not common, then what's the threat?
Mentally ill.
Okay. So do you think there's you have a fear that what you're experiencing is an indication of a more serious mental illness?
I may deep down. I haven't verbalized that. That just came out now. Okay. I get confused about how habitually your brain can produce all these random thoughts. You know what I mean? I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah. And I think there really is a threat here that's concerning you, and I think it's real helpful to, expose it. Maybe I can just, sort of help with some of my experiences. When I was going through my anxiety disorder and my brain was like all over the map and coming up with odd sensations and feelings and thoughts that I just thought were bizarre, I thought that I was losing my mind. And of course, way back then, you just couldn't hop on the internet and, check around and see what everybody else is doing. So I had to try to sort this through myself. So when I went to see the psychiatrist and whatever, psychologists and things like that, they didn't see anything that was out of the ordinary. They didn't have an explanation as to why I was having them. So it still remained a concern for me. But as I understood anxiety and what it can do to the brain and how it accelerates our thinking and how it raises, unnecessary fear flags, it said, okay, well, this has just got to be another anxiety trick. And it took me a while to really, accept that. But when I was looking at recovery, I thought, well, all these other things are going on, so this has to be what's going on. I mean, I'm not mentally ill. I'm not losing my mind about these things. I'm having these things. It's just I don't know how to put them in context, what normal thinking looks like. And when my stress, was up, my emotions were all over the map too. It was hard trying to pin down what I thought was normal. So during my, the physiological recovery, I really worked hard at just brushing those off and saying, no, this is just all about stress. Forget about it. When the odd thought and feeling would show up, that just say, no, this is an anxiety trick. I'm not falling for you no more. And because I did that, I was able to start settling my nervous system. And as my nervous system settled, the disturbing nature of the thoughts subsided. And as I started to get some clarity, I realized, well, yeah, that's exactly what's going on here. So I don't have to worry about those things. And then as I started investigating the cognitive side of anxiety, I realized a lot of people have unwanted thoughts. In fact, they're very, very common. And they seemed worse to me because my stress was up and the fear center was thinking that this was danger. So anyways, long story short, I really just parked them, recognizing, it's just an artifact of stress. I'm not going to worry about this. And over the course of time, they completely disappeared. And as my body settled, and as I came to a different place with my anxiety in terms of understanding, they were no longer an issue. I sometimes get them back once in a while when I really push my stress. Unfortunately, one of my underlying factors is I'm a driven person. I'm passionate. I like helping people. So I work hard. And I usually push my body to its limit, but it lets me know and I dial it back. So I see the direct connection, between those kind of thinking patterns and stress. And so I just treat them as any other symptom, say, whatever, and I, get my stress under control and away we go.
So is it a thinking pattern, or are they just random things that just pop up?
Well, initially it was a pattern because I was trying to figure out what was going on. I didn't feel safe either because I thought my mental health and, of course, consequently the rest of my life was in jeopardy. And so I was always on alert. And because I established a fear about that, whenever a kind of an off-color thought would pop up, of course, then I get a fear reaction. Well, that doesn't help get our stress down. So I really had to come to a different place with it. And essentially I made a decision. I said, I really don't care what this is. I'm going to give my body time to recover, and then I'll see what it's at. And as I did that, I was able to contain it because then I just realized it wasn't nothing other than stress. So that can come about from having a fear of developing a serious mental illness, and there's nothing you can do about it. And that is a common fear that a lot of anxious people get. I've worked with a lot of clients over the years who had the very same thing. But as they're working, getting their stress down, containing, certainly brushing those thoughts off in the meantime, they also experienced where they subsided and just said, well, forget it. I'm not even doing that anymore. So it is common, but it's real important, I think, to discover what that real threat is, so that when the fear fires, you know what it is.
Yeah, I mean it's details for me. It's just never good enough to answer the question for some reason. I don't know. So I think you're right. You just got to accept it and say this is a part of it. Don't try and get all the details. Just say this is a part of it and accept it, maybe.
That's a part of it, but I think there needs to be more there than just accept it, because it's really I'll use an illustration that we use in our therapy. I probably used it here sometimes as well. But, when we have established a fear, we have identified a real threat. And so for us to say, well, I'm just going to accept it, it's like if you're sitting in a chair and a person has a gun held to your head that's fully loaded, and you're going to say, well, I'm just going to accept the fact that he's not going to pull the trigger. Well, that only goes so far. You have to trust the fact that the gun's not going to go off. So what we like to do with especially established fears is to unload the gun. Because if a guy's holding out a gun and it's empty, then there's no threat, and it's easy to say, well, forget it. So this is where we need that sort of what are the containment statements? What's the truth here in this when that fear fires that I can use to refute the threat, that I can use to tell Amy, the amygdala, settle down, we're not in any danger here, never mind, forget about it. So we need to find ways to unseat that threat so it's no longer a threat, and that helps to contain. But trying to contain when we still believe we're in danger is real difficult. I just don't see it being successful.
Yeah, no, that's really hard. And what if you have like thousands of established fears?
Exactly. Yeah. Now, I just want to touch on that. It may not be related to why you said that, but we can establish a lot of fears around a core fear. So there's a difference between having a lot of fears and having a few core fears that are triggering all the splinter fears. Usually it's the core fear that triggers a lot of splinter fears. So if you go after the core threat, you eliminate all the other ones. So it may seem like a lot, but it comes always down to one.
You're right, because Stacy says you obsess constantly about certainty, trying to feel safe and secure.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I'll let other people talk. You know my story. I was an only child in an abusive family growing up, so worry was on my own, and worry was my way of trying to protect myself.
Yep.
You know?
Yeah.
I didn't know how to contain it all.
Yeah, totally. Well, and how do you? So do you raise a classic example of we're in a threatening environment, and what does the child do without resources to keep themselves safe? Well, worry is their only option. I have to think of every single thing to keep myself safe so I can feel safe, and that just becomes a pattern. It becomes a habit, and then we conduct our lives that way, right?
Yeah, I just was taking time off. I resigned from my job of 21 years because it was too much. You know, my head's going 18 directions, but that's all I did in the job too, was worry.
Yeah.
You know, high pace. Okay, good. Well, thank you. I have a session with him later today.
Okay.
So that'll be good.
I just want to, before you go, and it's not dominating the call, and I appreciate you, being willing to talk about these things. So what do you think, again, coming back to, you have a concern about feeling safe and secure, and again, I want to ask, what is it? Again, do you think it is, having a mental illness that's not resolvable? Is it just feeling safe overall?
I think it's the unrealistic control thought that I need to be able to control everything and feel, and that's the only way I can get through life, is if it's an illusion, right? If I know what's going to happen. I'm comfortable. I've got everything in control. That's the way my father was a control freak. Like treat us like robots. So
gotcha.
So everything's in control. So I kind of like learned that a little bit.
Yeah.
And it's just an illusion, and I'm very impatient too, which makes it hard too. So I'll say it's not working.
Yeah.
It's been 10 minutes,
Yeah, gotcha, sure. So that feeling safe and secure is not necessarily about having the thoughts. It's about feeling safe overall. For example, you mentioned earlier that when you go into a new environment, you do the analyzing thing. What kinds of things are you analyzing?
I overanalyze everything. If I have downtime, I overanalyze. I kind of feel like a weirdo saying it, but I'll find anything over the last 8 months that I've made up to overanalyze. Like, why is this happening in my brain? Why is this happening? Why is this happening? Almost like I feel like I can do something about it my way, like trying to push forward and fix it. Because I was very bright in mathematics, so everything's like concrete to me, like 2 + 2 is 4. When in fact, Stacy's always said, you got to stop why and you got to ask how to respond. And for me, that just seems like it's like Chinese to me. I just don't understand. I have a hard time understanding that. So
let me ask you, on a scale of 0 to 100, 100 being max, 0 being nothing, how afraid are you of developing a serious mental illness?
Okay, so I don't think it's the mental illness. I think it's that this will never go away.
Okay, that was going to be your next question, actually. So if you could answer that mental illness one, 0 to 100%, where would you rate it?
Maybe like a 40, because I went to the bank today and did some paperwork, and everything was fine, like social laugh. We were all laughing, and then as soon as I left, I was like, well, why was I fine? and I go right back into it.
Gotcha.
Right?
Okay.
Yeah.
So then let me ask you this, 0 to 100%, how afraid are you that you will never stop overanalyzing and dealing with anxiety?
99.
Okay, there you go. So that would be the core threat, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, sure.
Yeah.
And this is, one of the main core fears we see when we struggle with anxiety, especially when we struggle at it for a while. And it's also one of the more common ones we see when people have made good recovery and then they fall back. It's like, wow, I did everything, so there's nothing really left for me to do. Here I'm struggling again. But if you look at why we struggle, it will always, always, always come back to uncontained worry. What if?
Sure is.
What if?
Oh, yeah.
And the threat of not being able to recover and have this never go away becomes an established threat. And then we do everything we can, because that's the brain's job, don't forget. When it identifies a threat, it's going to do everything it can to get us out of danger. So that would be the threat I would be focusing on 100% right now. Yeah, the mental illness, no, I think mental illness is just a spin-off of your core threat, that you're overanalyzing is an indication of mental illness, therefore, whereas this is never going to be like this for the rest of my life is probably the key threat there.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. I mean, it gets scary because it's like, it's a behavior, and then there's all these different topics you can throw into it. You can throw in thousands, right? Yep. I mean, things that don't make any sense.
Yeah. And
your brain's focused on it because, is that because you've established it as a fear very quickly?
Yeah, and it's a significant fear, and he's probably told you that this goes back to the threat when you were growing up. When we feel helpless to change our environment and we feel in danger, the only option we have is to worry. So, all right, now that you're an adult and out of that environment, well, now this has become another threat. And one thing I did during my struggle is I arrived at the conclusion saying, oh my gosh, this threat's in me. What if I can't ever get rid of it? Like, it's not something I can go somewhere. It's always with me, right?
Yep.
And I thought, oh my gosh, I'm doomed here.
Yes.
And then when I realized, oh, well, all right, thoughts are just thoughts. When I establish this, well, I can break. If I establish it, surely I can break it. I do have the power. And since it always comes back to worry, then it became, well, if this is only caused by worry, I can stop myself from worrying. So then I went, set about finding ways to look at my key threats and found ways to say, no, I'm not in any danger because, and that helps. So if you look at your threat, this will never go away and it won't ever stop overanalyzing. I'm doomed, and that's a major threat. Well, the reality is you can contain worry. It's fully within your ability. If you see how it's related to your background and how that behavior is relevant to you now, but this has become the threat rather than the abusive father or whatever, then we realize, well, man, I'm creating this. Like, I am creating my threat by worrying about it.
Focusing on it.
Oh, absolutely.
Right.
Yeah. And if we fear it's never going to go away, well, we've made a miscalculation. We can change behaviors all the time. In fact, we forget things we don't want to forget all the time. Surely we can overcome a fear, right? And because the brain, adapts via neuroplasticity, we can change our thinking. So while it can seem like we'll never get over it, we can. In fact, we probably have more control over this than any other threat that's external, because we can make the change. So, I think there's a miscalculation that this is a real threat to you. I understand it. I get it. I had that myself. But there's lots of ways to overcome these threats and change them, especially if you look at it from the worry perspective. Worry is imagining something that doesn't. It's using our imagination to scare us. Well, we can also use our imagination a bunch of different ways. So
I got it. So anything that's like completely irrational, like out of this world, isn't strange. It can just make up bizarre, irrational stuff. And if we become afraid of it, then it kind of sticks and we kind of lock in on it and keep thinking about it.
Yep. And that becomes a threat. And then everything that relates to that threat seems to resonate. All of a sudden, well, this is a danger, and that's a danger, and this is a danger. Oh my gosh, this is a danger. It's because the core threat's underneath them all, right? No, one thing.
Do you stay busy too? Like, I haven't been busy for 8 months, so the isolation really brought it up with the COVID and stuff.
Yeah.
keeping your mind occupied on other things is a good idea too, right?
Absolutely. And this is one of the, he raised a good point here. It's one of the plus and minuses about working on recovery. The plus of, backing out of things and gearing the body down and relaxing and resting is very helpful to the nervous system. The downside is then our anxious worry behavior turns in on itself. And now we start developing, things we have to fix. And so I think, during my recovery, and I really think this was from God, actually, I fluked into treating all of my symptoms as tricks. I didn't have to understand them. I just recognized, okay, this is an artifact of that. I'm not going to do anything about that. So as I never picked it up and had to solve it, I just said, well, forget it. I'm not just doing that anymore. It's never mind. It's done. And that really helped me put to bed a lot of, especially the irrational stuff, because when the brain's really wired, everything can look rational, especially the threats. And so when I realized, wow, this is just an artifact of that, I'm not going to bother with that no more. And as I, again, moved toward it and I saw it diminish, it's like, okay, I get it. I don't have to do that no more. And this also applies for people who have really odd feelings that come up. Like, for example, when the body's stressed, someone may say something, you get really an odd feeling. In the past, I would have to figure out what that was and why am I feeling this way and yada, 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 until I realized, okay, this is just another consequence of stress. So when that feeling pops up, never mind, just ignore it and move on. And that really helps to contain the worry, because, again, when you look at this is all about worry. It's the what if X, Y, Z. If we didn't do the what if, we wouldn't be threatening. But every time we do the what if, the body triggers because it perceives it as a threat. So I just said, okay, I'm not going to what if no more. I'm just not doing that. This is a trick. Forget about it. Move on. And that really helps settle the body. Yeah.
So it's a trick, and then all of it dissolves away.
It does. Now, there's a difference. Like, for example, your background, I don't know much about you, but other than the things you just shared, but I came from an abusive background as well, and it came from my brother. Whenever my parents would leave, he would beat me up and whatever. So the moment my parents shut the door on the way out, I ran and locked myself in the bathroom. That was the only way I could protect myself. And so even before they would go, I'd have to be planning and analyzing, how am I going to protect myself? Because the threat was there. Sure. Yeah. And that became a way of life for me too. So, in my 20s, as my condition developed, I had to overanalyze everything. That's the only way I could feel safe. I'd go into every environment I could and imagine where all the exits were, what would happen if this person did this, because that was the way I had to keep myself safe. But I had to work at breaking that. And for me, the thing that really, really helped me break the control aspect was my trust in God. Because I recognize I'm not in control of most of the things I think I should be in control of, but God is. And as I developed my trust in God and placed my trust in Him for things that were going on beyond my control, it really helped me contain a ton.
It's a nasty trick, Jim.
Yeah.
Tricks are nasty. I mean, there's so many of them, and it's like, it's like any one of them can pop up at any time all day, and then you find yourself fighting it to hope that they don't come back, by overanalyzing. Yeah.
Especially if the threat there is about trying to get better. If the threat is, gee, I'm never going to get better and I'm going to feel like this for the rest of my life. Oh my gosh, this is terrible. Well, you see how those two fit together, because we've established a fear, and what's feeding the fear is our habit of analyzing. Yeah.
It's like, just go away already. Okay. So, and then the piece of advice that I think that is good that Stacy shared with me too, that I really like, is no matter how you feel, make sure you get up and engage in life. Like, I have a hard time, for a long time getting up, and I force myself out the door for a walk, and it's very uncomfortable, and I got the thoughts running through my head, but I do it anyway, you know? Yeah. And hopefully these healthy behaviors, eventually these are what we come to focus on instead of the bad ones, right?
Yeah.
Got it.
So there'd be two things I would focus on, and I'm sure you talked about this, but certainly the fear of not recovering is one. Yeah. And how you manage control, being okay with releasing control in your life.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, it's just, I'm married to someone who's the opposite, very mentally strong and loves uncertainty.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it balances out, but it's you know how this is. I guess everything seems worse than it is too.
Well, it can be, it can be serious for us because this is our life. This is our life experience moment to moment. Joe Normal, who doesn't have anxiety, is out there doing stuff because he's focused externally, where when our condition raises its head and we become afraid of it, well, we don't have that. It's with us wherever we go, and it colors everything we do. But the good news is we can change it because, again, if you look at this from a worry perspective, you say, well, what if I'm never going to do this? Well, the thing that's causing it is the worry. So when we notice our thoughts running down the worry trail, it's like, well, wait a minute, that's the cause right there. That worry trail right there, that's the cause of this. So I'm not going to do that no more. I'm just going to put a boundary there and say, no, I'm not doing that no more. And if you go after the fear of not recovering and the control issues and the things we talked about, I think you'll come to a different place. But as you probably know, this doesn't happen right away. Right? It's
Why not?
Yeah, I wish that were the case. But when that fear center latches onto these things, there's a lot of convincing we have to do to change its mind. But we can't. That's the good news.
Got it. Cool.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So this is all normal. I see this quite often, different fears, different things. But the two you mentioned here, fear of not recovering, is one of the most common we see, especially when anxiety's been around for a while. And almost every anxious person has an issue around control. Because, again, we come from backgrounds that we have to try to control because we don't like what's going on. And the only way we can as a child is through worry and thinking of all the things that can go wrong and trying to eliminate them all. That becomes a habit. So these are very, very common. This is not unusual by any stretch.
That's good to know. That makes me feel better.
Yeah.
Great. Thanks for your help.
Well, you're welcome. I certainly wish you.
I thought it was kind of interesting how you talked about how, like, your mathematical brain, thinks it's like it's doing something good about trying to solve the issue.
Yes.
And I'm an engineer, and it's like my brain is very good at solving problems, right?
Me
but
too.
The problem is like, the problem is like not with the problem solving, it's with the assumption that your Amy has told you that this is a fear, and we all just like believe it super quick, right?
Yeah.
And then we go into what we're super good at, right? Solving problems, but it's really the this assumption our brain makes that's faulty, and we get tricked, like Jim says, of like spending all of our effort trying to solve this problem when the real problem is the brain making these assumptions, right? So I found if I like try to step back, and just like view myself as like a guy who walks along in life and he's afraid of all these things, from the outside, it's like kind of bizarre, but from the internal, it's like we're the horse with the blinders on. We only see like what's right in front of us, and the Amy just turns down all the other stuff in our life and amplifies this one danger.
Yeah, and that's the other thing, right? Thanks for bringing that up. It's like when I was in isolation for COVID, working at home, this is when all of a sudden I was sitting at my desk and I was like, what the hell's going on here? And then I was like, oh, maybe it came back, maybe it didn't. I'll just keep going. And, it got worse and worse. And, just trying to figure it out all day. Like literally on the Anxiety Center website, going through my old notes, like, what's the answer? What's the answer? When in fact, and then that just became a habit, right? Just what's the answer? How do I get rid of this fast?
Yeah.
And it was just feeding into the wrong way of thinking.
Yeah. I think one of the most common threats we see is that when we struggle with anxiety for a while, then anxiety becomes the threat.
Yep.
So, well, that's the dog chasing the tail, isn't it?
Yep, that's what it feels like.
Yeah. Yeah, because when we worry about anxiety, we're creating anxiety. So that's how we chase the tail is, oh my gosh, anxiety's on one end and the worry's on the other. And it just keeps on driving around and around and around. So we have to, that's why we spend, a lot of time in the members area talking about anxiety as a behavior. It's not a threat. When we do certain behaviors, we're going to get the result. When we're going to worry, we're going to be anxious. So if we don't want to be anxious, then we stop worrying. And we stop worrying by containing the worry, shutting it off, finding ways to refute the threat, all those things. And so that's partially what's going on here. That's the fear of not recovering, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's really 100% what it is. And it's the fear of the anxiety, like you said, like 100%, because I'm always trying to figure out ways in my head. Now it seems automatic about why certain things are happening all day. And in fact, it just keeps me paralyzed, and I keep like mentally paralyzed, and it keeps me, unable to do certain tasks, spacing out, not being able to engage externally. It gets frustrating.
Yeah, all consuming, right?
Yes,
yeah.
100%.
Yeah. And that's that worry habit. So this is where, we got to go after that and recognize, okay, well, I'm creating the anxiety. Therefore, it is a threat. So if I stop creating it, it's no longer a threat. And I stop creating it by shutting off the worry, containing the worry habit. Yeah. So again, go back to those two things we talked about, especially the control aspect, and work at it from that way.
Yep.
And, see this quite often.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, editing the audio for this particular segment, one of the callers mentioned that the brain focuses in on the threat. And yes, it does. And for two main reasons. Number one is that when the survival mechanism is activated, the fear center of the brain zooms in and focuses solely on where the threats could be. So it's solely focused on determining or detecting the threat and then solving it or getting ourselves out of danger. That's the survival mechanism's main job, and it does a good job. But there's another reason that we have a hard time focusing away from that, is because there's a part of the brain in the brainstem called the reticular activating system, and its job is to filter information that we receive, to filter out information that's not important, and to help us focus on information that is important. So we have the fear center of the brain exclusively looking for danger and trying to find ways to get us out of danger, which is the problem-solving aspect, and the reticular activating system keeping our focus on the threat and filtering out anything that's extraneous data, which could also include our containment thoughts. Now, it might seem like a difficult struggle because it is, but we can override that by continually reinforcing our containment statements, finding ways to disengage the brain from the emergency action so that our prefrontal cortex, the rationalization area of the brain, can engage more, helping us to calm down. So while there is a struggle initially when the fear response is activated, we can still override it through convincing and convincing and convincing, which means using our containment statements to contain fear, to bring the fear response down so that we can more logically and rationally process the threat.